and my colleagues for the work they continue to do under especially challenging circumstances. I believe that we all get into public service to help others, and what a time for all of us to be doing that. We thought renegotiating NAFTA was a challenge. Well, this pandemic, I am sure, is the challenge of our generation and of my life. To have the chance to take up this work during this time with this team under the leadership of this Prime Minister has been and remains a privilege. With that, I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Telford. The first round of questions I have on my list for the 6-minute round is Mr. Barrett, Ms. Sturwitz, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Julian.
Caught with his hand in the cookie jar after all these previous red flags.
Mr. Chair, I have to reject what the member is saying in terms of what happened here, other than your opening comments, sir, which were that the Prime Minister did have concerns at the May 8th meeting when he was first briefed on this, and he said he wanted to get more by way of briefing, and that's what he did.
And after receiving new information, he was reassured. He didn't think there was any conflict of interest yet. Seems to be the case. How can you explain this?
We were reassured that this program was the only way that this program could happen this summer in this unprecedented time was for the WE organization to administer it and deliver it. And that was the reassurance we were given. There was, and at that point, it was determined to proceed.
Yet, the president of the public service said that they could have administered it. Did you not believe them?
I'm sorry, what?
Ms. Telford, I believe Mr. Fortin and might not have come through in translation. It was the president of the Public Service Alliance, I believe, was it not, Riel, that said they could deliver it. That was the question. The president of the Public Service Alliance indicated that the public service could deliver it. Why not?
So what we were briefed at the time, and actually on more than one occasion at that time during that period, was, and it was based on other experiences at the time, was that this was the only way the program could be delivered for this summer.
Mais Monsieur Trudeau savait.
But Mr. Trudeau knew there was a conflict of interest on May 8th, and he said he didn't want to make a decision right away because he was uncomfortable. You knew this, that he had already been caught twice infringing the Ethics Act, and yet you moved ahead even though that the mother and the brother of the Mr. Trudeau had been paid by We Charity. And the last time Mr. Trudeau said he would never get caught again. And what mechanism did you set up so that we have the same issue today? Did no one learn from previous misadventures?
Ms. Telford.
So there's a lot in there. I'll start with the fact of what we knew at that time and when we were making the decision. And what I knew at that time, and the Prime Minister has spoken to, is the fact that the Prime Minister has gone on the stage for some We Day events. He was never paid for speaking at those events. They were youth empowerment events that he'd gone to as someone passionate about empowering youth, but also as the youth critic and later the youth minister in the first mandate. And I also knew that the ethics commissioner, as I said in my opening remarks, that the ethics commissioner we had sought advice from as it related to Sophie Gregoire-Trudeau's role with the We Charity organization, and received clearance that she could both take that role on and have her expenses covered by the organization.
We will have to go back to Mr. Fortin.
Madame Telford.
Ms. Telford, as the Prime Minister's advisor and Chief of Staff, did you not already tell Mr. Trudeau that he should not get involved in this decision?
As I said, As I said already, what we discussed at the time and what we knew at the time was that this was a binary choice, as one of the other members said earlier. It was a choice on whether to proceed with this program to support students this summer in this way of connecting them to their communities or not. And the Prime Minister, there was no conflict discussed at that time.
Votre recommandation à vous, c'était
What was your recommendation to Mr. Trudeau? Did you recommend he proceed despite the appearance of a conflict of interest?
So first of all, again, as I said in my opening remarks, and as the Prime Minister referred to, and I believe the Clerk of the Privy Council made reference to as well, I did have questions on May 8th and had some concerns. I had concerns in terms of ensuring that that this was the right organization in order to do this, that it was truly the only organization that could do this, that all of the T's had been crossed and I's had been dotted. And yes, as I said in my opening remarks, I had some concerns around perception, knowing that it had just been recently that Sophie Gregoire-Trudeau's podcast had been launched. But I also knew that the Ethics Commissioner had cleared that. And so on that basis, we decided to proceed. And I support the Prime Minister in that.
We'll let it go back to Mr. Fortin. The last question, Mr. Fortin.
Vous êtes en train de nous dire, Madame
You're telling us, Ms. Telford, that the Ethics Commissioner told Mr. Trudeau he could proceed with this, and he decided to participate in the decision-making process in spite of the perception of a conflict of interest?
Ms. Telford.
What I said was, and I said also in my opening remarks, is that we had clearance from the Ethics Commissioner for Sophie Gregoire-Trudeau to have to do the work that she was doing with the WE organization.
Mr. Fortin, we're out of time on that round.
Monsieur le Président, question.
Chair, point of privilege, point of order. Because I'm asking witnesses in French questions, I'm losing roughly 20 to 30% of my time because of the delay in interpretation. And sometimes the answers don't relate to my questions. And obviously the witnesses is not understanding what I'm saying. And yourself, Chair, you did a correct translation, but you had to translate one of my questions to the witness. And in terms of other parties, I've had much less time than the Liberals to ask questions, and they're just asking for advertising, whereas I'm asking real questions. And I would like the same speaking time as the Conservatives. I'd like to be able to do my job correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortin, and I actually do believe you have a legitimate concern. I am always, when you're asking questions, I am having a hard job keeping up because I have to wait for translation too. We'll have to deal with that at a committee level sometime, but I think it is a concern. Mr. Julian, 6 minutes.
To have the chance to take up this work during this time with this team under the leadership of this Prime Minister has been and remains a privilege. With that, I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Telford. The first round of questions I have on my list for the 6-minute round is Mr. Barrett, Ms. Sirowitz, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Julian. Mr. Barrett, you're on. 6 minutes is yours.
Ma'am, this committee passed a motion calling on the Prime Minister to testify for 3 hours. This meeting is the only one listed in his schedule for today. Frankly, I find it a bit disrespectful to Canadians that he couldn't find a couple extra hours to answer questions. Why couldn't the Prime Minister respect the House of Commons and attend for the full time today?
I don't know whether that's on the topic, but we'll let it go. Ms. Telford.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that the Prime Minister not only accepted the invitation and was pleased to come before the committee, but and originally the invitation was for 1 hour, which he accepted. And then he extended his time and stayed for just over 90 minutes.
Will you schedule him to attend the remaining time requested?
I believe that is perhaps a discussion for another time, Mr. Barrett.
So this is the third time the Prime Minister is under investigation for breaking ethics laws. He's already been found guilty twice of breaking the law. And well, we'll see what's going to happen a third time, though we did hear an admission from the Prime Minister today that he ought to have recused himself. So we know the regard the Prime Minister has for ethics laws. It's been referred to, I recall, as Harper's Law. So why is it that this Prime Minister thinks that he's above the law?
I am going to just to take a moment here, Ms. Telford, the relevance here. And I remind members again, we are here to examine how much the government spent in awarding the $912 million sole source contract to We Charity, and how the outsourcing of the Canada Student Service Grant to We Charity proceeded as far as it did.
Chair.
But I will allow that question. Go ahead, Ms. Telford.
Well, first of all, when you suggest that there was an admission in his remarks and his answers to your many questions earlier, I would just want to correct you in saying that actually it's something he said to Canadians some time ago now. And I believe that the Prime Minister and our entire office and government take ethics extremely strongly. It's a very important thing for us. And it's why we go back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's office all the time, and we fully cooperate with anything the Ethics Commissioner asks us to look into or to do.
Back to Mr. Barrett.
Well, I mean, he's been found guilty of breaking the act twice. I know that the back and forth goes on often, and that's because he's been under investigation so many times. As his chief, did you read the act after the first time he was found guilty of breaking it?
I've actually read the act before that. But when you say that's, again, you're suggesting that the reason we're going back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's office was for reasons that, yes, that was the case, but we also go back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's office all the time, whether it's annual disclosures or questions, because we want to make sure we're getting the interpretations that do also change over time that we interpret things as accurately as possible, as often as possible.
Mr. Barrett.
After March 1st, how many times did the PMO communicate with the Kielburgers or any of their intermediaries?
So there were, I looked into this, there were a handful of interactions with the Prime Minister's office and the We organization around the Canada Summer Student Grant between then and the launch of the program. There was only one in prior to the launch period of the program. It was in early May, where one of the policy staff did what is very, very normal in their job, which is to speak to stakeholder organizations. And it was a very general discussion, and they actually redirected the stakeholder, the We organization, to ESDC officials, which was the more appropriate place to be able to get answers for the questions they were asking.
We'll let it come back to Mr. Barrett, and I didn't outline at the beginning, Ms. Telford, that we are under what we call the COVID-19 rules. We try and keep the answers as tight to the questions as we can, or I try to, and sometimes I succeed. Mr. Barrett, I won't take that time from you. Go ahead.
And what day did that interaction occur, ma'am?
I believe it was on May 5th.
Okay. And are you able to tell us which policy staffer made that inquiry?
I was a member of the policy team.
Okay. So the Prime Minister claims today that his staff were working on the program before May 8th. Can you provide this committee a list of everyone that was involved? Can you furnish the committee in writing with everyone that was involved in the decision?
It's public information who all the staff in the Prime Minister's office are, and I'm here to represent all of those staff as the senior most member of the Prime Minister's office. So if you have questions about any of them or for any of them, I'm happy to take them today.
Okay, well, the Prime Minister testified today that the option given to the cabinet was we or nothing, and which was ultimately the outcome, was nothing. And why did the cabinet accept this supposed binary choice? Why not ask for options? Is this a government run by the public service, or is it run by cabinet? Because the accountability rests with the head of government. It rests with the cabinet. So I'm getting pretty frustrated hearing how much respect that the members of cabinet have for the public service while throwing them under the bus instead of taking accountability for their decisions. So why wouldn't they have required options?
So I want to just address two things you said there. One is not trying to, no one is throwing anyone under the bus here. I'm explaining, and I'm happy to explain what happened. And we relied on the public service and their recommendations, and their recommendation was to proceed. And the question you're asking around, you being frustrated, it was a binary choice. That was exactly the kind of question that the Prime Minister and I were asking on May 8th, which caused it to be pulled from the cabinet agenda that morning so that we could confirm that that was truly the case.
Last question, Mr. Barrett.
Since from March 1st until now, when did you speak with the Prime Minister about the WE organization?
On May 8th was when we first learned that the WE organization was being proposed as the organization to deliver and administer this program. And so that is when we spoke about it.
And provide all the documentation, including the recommendations that went forward on May 8th and May 22nd, all documentation concerning the WE program.
Ms. Telford.
I'm, of course, and I've always been happy to coordinate with the ethics committee, to cooperate with the ethics commissioner, and will continue to do so. And in terms of documents, I would have to look into, I'm not sure what documents you're looking for, but I'm happy to look into any specific requests.
The specific request is for the memos that were going to cabinet on May 8th and went to cabinet on May 22nd. Those are very specific requests, and the PCO has already indicated that they will be providing that to us, and we would appreciate having the cooperation of the PMO. Second quick question. We know that you've had a past background with both WE and its predecessor organization. Have you or any member of your family, either directly or indirectly through Artbound, ever received expense reimbursement, free travel, financial payments, or use of WE staff time?
No.
Thank you. Now, my third question is around Mr. Morneau's deep connections with WE. Were you aware of Mr. Morneau's connections and his family connections with the WE organizations?
The only connection that I was that only really came back to me recently was the fact that, as the Prime Minister mentioned, his daughter had written a book that when I saw the cover shown recently, it had, or I'm not sure if it was the front or the back, but it did have a quote from a Kielburger on it, and that was really the extent of my knowledge of the connections.
Were you aware of the private travel that was not reimbursed, the use of private aircraft? Were you aware of any of those cases with Mr. Morneau?
Not until recently.
Were you aware that we used their staff on staff time and basically provide them with expense reimbursements to help fill seats and act as backdrops at Mr. Morneau's events?
No.
Given those direct benefits, would you agree that Mr. Morneau was clearly in a conflict of interest around this WE proposal?
Minister Morneau has already said that he apologized and said that he wished he'd recused himself from this cabinet decision, and I obviously support that.
So if you believe he was in a conflict of interest, would that not apply to Mr. Trudeau as well?
The Prime Minister also said, and it was out of concern for perception, he's also recently said that he wished he'd recused himself from this, and I support that as well.
But you would agree that they were both in a conflict of interest, in other words, had contravened the Conflict of Interest Act?
No, I think that is, no. What both of them said is that, and what the Prime Minister said specifically, is that he wished he'd recused himself from this particular decision at Cabinet, so that there weren't any concerns around perception of favoritism.
So you see it as a perception, not as a violation of the Conflict of Interest Act. Okay, thank you for that. Now, moving on to the actual decision, were you involved, or was the Prime Minister's office involved in any way in the decision not to adequately fund Canada's summer jobs program for students? As you are aware, and as MPs across the country are aware, it was basically a program that was shortchanged, and right across the country, positions were not filled because of the inadequate funding that was provided to Canada's summer jobs. Was that a decision that you were aware of or that you took part of?
I do believe that differs from the issue we're discussing today, Peter, but I will go ahead, Ms. Telford, if you would answer.
It's very
for it, go ahead.
relevant, Mr. Chair, very relevant.
I know how important the Canada Summer Jobs Program is both to students and to all of the honourable members in the House of Commons. We hear about it from caucus members on a regular basis, how important it is in their ridings. And I was pleased to hear recently that there's over 85,000 jobs that have been approved through the Canada Summer Jobs Program this summer.
Well, my question was actually, were you involved in that decision, or who took that decision? But I'll move on. I will quote from you from the Public Service Alliance of Canada's national president, Chris Alward, who appeared before this committee. He said, and I quote, Mr. Trudeau's claim that We Charity is the only one that can administer the new grant program is not only factually wrong, it's also insulting to our members. And that means both in terms of the Prime Minister's testimony and yours, that factually you are giving information that is simply incorrect. To what extent was the public service actually involved in this decision when clearly public servants wanted to be involved in the program, were ready to be involved in the program, and don't appear to have been considered at any point in the elaboration of this scheme?
So we can go based on the information that was recommended to us at the time by public servants. And public servants themselves said that this was a program at this time that was best administered by a third-party organization.
I just quoted a public servant that said the contrary.
Mr. Julian, I took a little time from you talking there, so I'll give you one more question.
The public servants have indicated that they could administer the new grant program. My question to you is, and it comes back to the Canada Summer Jobs underfunding as well, who made these decisions? Were they passed on to you? Were you aware in the Prime Minister's office, or did the Prime Minister's office participate in these decisions that had such wide-reaching consequences?
Look, it's my job to give the best advice I can based on the best information I can to the Prime Minister on all of the decisions that are coming before him and before the Cabinet. So to the extent that any of the various student and youth programs were coming to Cabinet, then I was giving advice to the Prime Minister on those programs.
Okay, thank you both. We'll now go to a 5-minute round. First up will be Mr. Cooper, Mr. Fraser, Mr. Cumming, and Ms. Katrakis. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Telford, for being here today. You said, and the Prime Minister said, that the Ethics Commissioner gave a clearance with respect to the activities of Ms. Gregoire Trudeau with respect to We. And the Prime Minister said that clearance had taken place a long time ago. Would you not see that there might be a need to talk to the Ethics Commissioner on May 8th in the face of a $500 million contribution? That the Prime Minister would be involved in discussing and ultimately deciding at the Cabinet table?
Ms. Telford.
So when clearance was sought for the work that Sophie Gregoire Trudeau has been doing to work on destigmatizing mental health and empowering young people, the ethics commissioner actually explicitly stated that she was asked to be doing this in her own right, not as wife of the Prime Minister, and that her expenses could be covered as part of that work. So we had the clearance for her to do the thing she was doing, and it actually also explicitly stated that it did not put us into any position of conflict.
Ms. Telford, that was in the abstract. Now you had before you a $500 million contribution that was being discussed and decided upon at Cabinet. Did you advise the Prime Minister that he ought to consult the Ethics Commissioner? And if not, why not? And why didn't he? Because obviously it's proven, as it turns out, to be of some interest to the Ethics Commissioner.
Ms. Telford.
I don't believe it was entirely in the abstract. We had a very complete description of what Sophie's work was going to be and the kind of and the scope of it. And that's what had actually just recently launched. The podcast was part of that scope. It also included a clearance for her to be able to do travel for some of her speaking engagements with the organization.
You said, and the Prime Minister said, you were concerned about people's perceptions. I submit that I take it that would be perceptions of conflict of interest. I would submit actual conflicts of interest. So it's inexplicable why you or would not have advised him, or why he would not have taken it upon himself to go to the Ethics Commissioner. But I want to ask you about May 8th and what you said and what he said, namely that he pushed back when he learned about the proposal and had questions. If in fact the Prime Minister pushed back, then how do you explain that the WE organization was collecting eligible expenses as of May 5th?
Ms. Telford.
I think that is a question that is, and I'm sure you did, but it's a question best placed to the officials who made the arrangements with the WE organization. I believe you asked those questions of the WE organization as well, in terms of the specifics within the contribution agreement. But you suggested that it was perhaps, you said if he pushed back. I can assure you he actually did push back with a number of questions in that briefing, and it's why it didn't go to Cabinet that day.
Well, but for 2 weeks between May 8th and May 22nd, we continued to incur eligible expenses. So it just doesn't add up to say the Prime Minister pushed back, but it wasn't frozen. The message wasn't conveyed to we, and they continued to proceed with moving ahead as though they were about to administer the program. How do you explain that?
Again, I would encourage you to ask those questions if you haven't already, though I'm sure you did, of the WE organization and of the officials involved in the crafting of the contribution agreement.
Well, clearly the message didn't get very far if the Prime Minister, in fact, pushed back.
The program was launched, as you know, at the end of June, and it was only at that time that the agreement, or just prior to then, obviously, that the agreement was finalized. How they structured the details within the agreement, that I cannot speak to.
Well, they continue to incur expenses as the Prime Minister supposedly pushed back. But I want to ask you, Mr. Julian had raised the issue of Artbound, and I want to pick up a little bit on that and ask more broadly, what is the total value of expenses, benefits, reimbursements, or any other in-kind or monetary consideration that you have received from the WE organization or any organization affiliated with the Kielburgers?
Nothing.
And that would include with respect to your travel with Craig and Mark Kielburger to Kenya in February of 2011?
I did not travel anywhere.
You did not travel anywhere in February of 2011? Well, I happened to have pulled up an article profiling Jason Denny, in which it notes that in February of 2011, that he, along with Seamus O'Regan, Craig and Mark Kielburger, Amanda Alvaro, and Katie Telford, among many extraordinary others, traveled to a region of Kenya to build an art school. You know nothing about that trip?
I'm familiar with how they went on that trip. I was not on that trip.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have to end it there, Mr. Cooper, and we'll go to Mr. Fraser, followed by Mr. Cumming.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Telford, for being with us today. I want to just prod into the May 8th meeting a little bit, where there was pushback and concerns raised. In response to Mr. Barrett's question earlier, you indicated the kinds of things that were pushed back on was the binary choice that was presented by the public service. I'm curious, did you actually push back, you or the Prime Minister push back on the idea that it had to be a binary choice? Did you ask that they consider other organizations?
Yes, those were the types of questions we were interested in, and as the committee has heard, I believe, from some of the preceding witnesses, that they had considered and assessed a number of other partners, but that was the kind of thing exactly that we wanted to know.
And nevertheless, they remained confident that the choice was binary. We go ahead with We Charity, or the program doesn't happen. Is that fair?
That's right.
Okay. Did you or anybody else at PMO ever ask We Charity to administer the Canada Student Service Grant Program?
No.
There was a